So so far we've talked about 3 of the guidelines. Let's move on to number 4. The 4th one says, to be food for a species, a substance must make its valuable nutrients available to us in its natural state, easily available in its natural state. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, if something is a food for us, we shouldn't need to do a whole bunch of processing to make those nutrients available. So I'll give you an example. How many of you here have ever had wheatgrass juice?
Yeah.
Yeah? And most people drink wheatgrass juice because they really love the taste, right?
It's awesome, man.
I think people are usually using it because they think it's very valuable. They think it contains a lot of valuable nutrients. It is a natural, or more natural. Again, it's juice. It's extracted. It doesn't exist in nature, but it's a natural supplement. Okay, that's what it really is. But let me ask you a question. Why don't people just eat the grass?
Can't digest it.
Because we can't digest grass. Why not? Because grass is almost all cellulose. And cellulose is defined as indigestible plant fiber. So if grass isn't digestible by humans, it's not food for us. If it's not food for us, why are we trying to figure out how to consume it? Okay? So wheatgrass juice, it's not a natural food for our bodies. Anything that is a natural food for our bodies, we don't have to process in order to be able to consume it. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. I'll give you another example. Over 20 years ago, I was involved in starting a raw vegan potluck group in the Washington, D.C. area. We met every month, and there were 2 other members. One of them lived in an attic apartment in a private home. He had a room, essentially a small room in this house. He couldn't have people over. It wasn't his house. The other one lived in a, what was it called? It was essentially an ashram. And they were allowed to have social functions there, but they weren't allowed to bring onions, garlic, and various other things into the building. And because yogic diet never included those things. Why not? Well, we talked about them yesterday. We talked about them before. But because of that, the 3 organizers, I was the only one that actually had a place we could use where people could bring whatever they were going to bring. So almost all of the events were held at my house for about 5 years. And there was a woman that kept showing, and as it turned out, I mean, there was another guy that had a significant amount of experience, but wasn't particularly adept at speaking about it. And we were the only 2 that really had any experience. So I wound up almost every month I was giving lectures and so forth. And there was a woman who would show up each time with this dish. And it was a dish that she had learned from the same chef that I told you I'd taken some classes from over 20 years ago. But the dish consisted of kale, collard greens, onions, oil, salt. There might have been 2 or 3 other ingredients. So far, as you may have noticed, there isn't a single ingredient I've mentioned that I believe is actually food or belongs in the human body. And so one day I said to her, the orientation of the group was, this is around helping people create the highest level of health. And so one day I said to her, that dish, it's not really optimal. She said, why not? I said, well, because kale and collard greens are very difficult for our bodies to digest in their natural state. She said, I know. That's why I put it through the food processor. Because it was all chopped up like baby food, right? So again, this was this idea that if we chop it up small enough, the body doesn't have to digest it. But remember, the body digests things down to the cellular level it's breaking them down. We actually have to be able to take the fats apart. We have to be able to take the proteins apart. That's what digestion is. It's not about cutting into smaller pieces. What does happen when we cut it into smaller pieces? This is like a creamy thing with oil. And so what do you normally do with that? You chew it up a lot in your mouth? You put it in your mouth and swallow it. Again, digestion doesn't start in the mouth when you do that. Okay, so another example, something that she was believing that processing it would make it more digestible. It doesn't. It doesn't even do that. These are not things that really belong in the body, because our natural foods are things that we can easily get the nutrients from without having to process in any way. Okay? So if we can't efficiently digest it on our own, it's not something we need to be consuming. Anybody have any questions about that one?
You said digestion doesn't start in the mouth, but I thought it does start.
Not when you don't chew anything.
What if you chew it?
Of course. But the point is, you don't chew things that are completely blended up. You swallow them. That's what people usually do. That's the natural instinct. People, the juicing advocates may tell you to chew your juices, but how many people actually do that? How ridiculous does it feel to try to chew a liquid? You swallow it.
I do that with water.
You do it with water? Most of us swallow things that don't need to be chewed. And the fact is that we're designed to eat things that do need to be chewed. And when we chew foods, and only when we chew them thoroughly and adequately long enough, do we actually start the process of digestion as it needs to happen in the mouth, and send the proper messages to our digestive tract so that the body knows what it's dealing with and can properly process it. You swallow it right through, you're going to have a very hard time getting much benefit from that. Okay? And again, this applies to blended foods, it applies to juices, smoothies, it applies to anything that's completely processed in a food processor. We are taking most of the benefit out of the food by processing it that way. We are designed to start the process by chewing it with our own teeth in our mouths. This is what we do. I got a question from someone yesterday. He said, that's all fine. This is on one of my YouTube videos. He said, what do I do? What do you suggest for someone like me who has all kinds of serious dental problems? I can't chew anything. What should I do? Should I use a blender? I said, well, if you live alone, that may be your only option. If you have a partner, a much better option, if your partner's willing to do this for you, would be to have your partner chew the food.
Ew.
And then put it in your mouth.
Gross.
But that's how you digest food, by processing it in your mouth, in a human mouth, not in a blender. You get much more from the food if you chew it up. This is what birds do for their young. You don't have to swallow it and regurgitate it, you just need to chew it up. Same thing, if a woman can't produce enough milk and so is putting a child on solid foods earlier than normal, the best thing to do for that baby would be to chew up the food and then put it into the baby's mouth. The baby's not capable of digesting it on its own if it's earlier than they're designed to be consuming solid food. That's the way to do it. Okay? So, you get over your squeamishness when it's what you need to do to be healthy. It's what I would do.
I've seen mothers do that.
Yeah, well, it's what to do in that situation. It's no different for for an adult that can't chew up their own food than it is for a baby that's not capable of processing it. You do not get that benefit from a blender. It doesn't work. Okay? So just so you know. All right.
I was thinking the grains would fall under that rule, but you could also sprout them and then chew them.
Well, if you allow a grain to begin to germinate and it's still a grain, it's really virtually indigestible. If you allow it to grow into a little green plant, now you're talking about something different. It's not a grain anymore, it's a green plant. You can eat little tiny sprouts, but they're not grains anymore. But if they're still grains, virtually indigestible.
Due to
Okay.
starch.
Well, yeah, due to their makeup. Yeah, very difficult for the body and toxic to the body in many ways. Okay, any other questions about that guideline? Is there a question? Okay. Let's move on to the next one. To be food for a species. This next one is basically going to repeat some of what we just did, but put a finer point on it. Okay? So we were just talking about processing food. The next guideline says to be food for a species, a substance must be both edible and eaten in its natural state. What is its natural state? Well, among other things, among being not processed in any way, that includes the way that most people process foods every day and don't even think of as processing. We call it cooking. In order to be food for any species, a substance must be edible and eaten in its raw state. Why is that? Well, when we cook food, what we do is we destroy some or most of the nutrients in the food. I've pointed out to some of you here with me recently, the word vitamin is a conjunction of two other words. Vital amine. A vitamin is a vital amine. Vital means alive. Not alive after cooking. You would destroy a lot of vitamins by cooking. Some of them completely. Vitamin C, completely destroyed very quickly by cooking, by exposure to oxygen. It's a very unstable vitamin. Others are more stable. But here's the issue. Whole, real, natural foods always come packaged with cofactors that we need to use them properly. Okay, one of the problems with conventional nutrition is it looks at every single nutrient by itself. It's kind of like medicine does, right? If you have a problem with your heart, you see a heart specialist who may not be paying any attention to the interaction of the heart with the rest of the body. Okay, and that's true whatever it is. Your heart doesn't function by itself in a vacuum. It functions as part of a whole system. In much the same way, whole foods, real foods, and the nutrients in those foods function as systems. When we cook food, when we process food in any way, what we're doing is we're destroying some of the nutrient content. We're now changing the complexion of that food. It no longer contains everything it used to. It contains some of that, but not all of that. And so we're creating imbalances in the body by giving the body an unnatural substance. Cooked food is not natural because it doesn't occur in nature. It occurs in your kitchen. Okay, it occurs when you make it happen. But what's the effect of that? Well, the effect with animals is always the same. They get sick and die much more quickly than when the food is raw. And it's no different for human beings. Now, about 11 years ago, I was about to go off on a lecture tour of Europe, including Finland and Sweden. And shortly before the trip, I saw news from Sweden. It was awesome because I was about to go off to Stockholm, and from Stockholm was some news I could be sharing with the people there that most of them hadn't heard about yet. And it was interesting because it was about the toxicity of cooked food, but it didn't start that way. Scientists in Sweden wanted to determine what was the increased risk of cancer for people who were working with a known carcinogenic compound. Now, this is probably no surprise, but if you're working with something, for instance, people that work with pesticides every day tend to have much higher rates of cancer because they're constantly exposed to a carcinogenic substance. So these scientists assumed that people who were working with this known carcinogenic compound, something called acrylamide. It's an acrylic amide, okay? It's essentially plastic. People who are working with this particular chemical every single day and handling it would have higher rates of cancer. And the original study was designed to determine what was the increased risk of cancer of people working with this substance. Well, they got the results back, and what they saw was that there was no increased incidence of cancer. No measurable risk of cancer greater than there was for the rest of the population. And that didn't make sense to them. So they continued with their research until they figured out why. A couple years later, what they realized was that the reason that people working with this carcinogenic compound did not have a higher risk of cancer than the average person was that the average person was eating this substance several times a day. Okay? Now, who would do that? Well, pretty much everyone. You ever eat any cooked carbohydrates? Because if you've ever eaten cooked carbohydrates, you've eaten acrylamide. Acrylamide is formed when we cook carbohydrates. By the way, anyone still here drinking coffee? Coffee is a very high source of acrylamide. Okay? There are a lot of places acrylamide shows up you wouldn't even expect to see it. It's all over the place. Acrylamide shows up in roasted nuts to a fairly high degree, even though nuts aren't even don't contain a lot of starch. They're mostly fat and protein. But the fact is, every living cell, virtually everything contains some carbohydrate. When you cook it, you're creating acrylamide. Now, the higher the temperature, the more you create. And so when the news got to the U.S., the spin doctors went to work on it. And they said, the official reports were, see, we told you French fries and potato chips were bad for you. Because fried foods are going to contain some of the highest amounts of acrylamide. But bread, cereal, rice, potatoes, corn, all these things contain acrylamide. Now, very low levels of acrylamide, some people say 0. I believe it's actually very low levels in foods that are cooked with water. Why is that? Because the temperature is capped at the boiling point. Okay, if you cook with water, not steaming, steaming goes higher, and there's going to be more. But if you cook at boiling point with water, the water temperature never exceeds 100 degrees centigrade or 212 degrees Fahrenheit, right? So there's going to be fewer acrylamides in something that's cooked with a dry method of cooking. But all these foods contain acrylamide. Now, and the official reports when this information was released were that the average person is consuming up to 100 times what's considered a safe amount of acrylamide at every meal. But let me ask you a question. What do you think is a safe amount to consume of a known carcinogenic compound? This is a neurotoxin. Okay. What's a safe amount? Remember, these things tend to bioaccumulate. There's no such thing as a safe amount. Why do they say there is? Well, again, the U.S. government is owned by big business. They have to pretend there's safe amounts of these poisons because their money comes from people that create these poisons. But there is no safe amount. Okay? Remember that acrylamide was discovered by accident in food. How many other toxic compounds are created by cooking food? Well, we know about some, like advanced glycation end products. I mean, there are many things that we're aware of, and probably many more that we're not aware of. There have been various studies over time that show that the human body reacts poorly to cooked food. It reacts as if it were poisoned. There's an immune response that happens. And I've told some of you that 98.6, an average body temperature, not a healthy body temperature, but a normal one. Normal means average. That an average body temperature exists for most people because they're consuming cooked food every day. And so the immune system responds, and one of the things it does is it raises its temperature. Healthy bodies tend to run 1 to 2 degrees cooler than that. Now, I think we've been able to agree that we're tropical animals, right? How would you be most comfortable in the tropics? At 98.6 or at 96.6? Clearly, you'd be more comfortable at the lower temperature. That's a healthy body temperature. All right? Again, this is just further evidence. The average person is walking around poisoned all the time. The body constantly reacting to these poisons. For most people at every single meal. Okay? So, to be food for a species, a substance must be both edible and eaten in its natural raw state. One more piece I'll share with you I thought was kind of interesting. Years ago I was driving through Washington, D.C. listening to a program on National Public Radio, and this was probably 20 years ago. It was about genetically modified foods, and this was very early in the game. Very few people understood what this was about. There wasn't much press yet. There weren't all the books that were out there now. And there was a government scientist on the program who was defending the practice of genetic modification. Now, Washington, D.C. has a pretty astute, a highly educated audience. And someone called in and said, but wait a second. When the human body consumes genetically modified food, it's dealing with all these things it was never designed to deal with in the first place. That's got to be a problem for it. And the scientist said, well, he said, it's true that genetically modified foods means the body's dealing with hundreds of chemicals it was never designed to deal with before. He said, but it's not a problem. He said the exact same thing happens as when we eat cooked food. Now, he thought he was defending the practice of genetic modification. He was, in fact, indicting the process of cooking. Okay? So, and if you want a simple graphic, think about this. Take an organic material, put it in an oven, and cook it for an hour at 500 or 600 degrees. When it comes out, is it the same thing? Well, a lot of people think it is. It's been cooked, but it's the same thing. Well, imagine that organic thing was a log, and you were putting it into a fireplace, cooking it for an hour. What happens at the end of the hour? You've completely changed it. It's not the same in any way. Food may look the same, but it's not the same at all. Okay, what happens inside the food molecularly, what happens to the structure of the cell, it's completely different. That's what cooking is doing. Okay, it's not taking something healthy and just changing it a little bit. It's completely changing. It's completely altering it. Let me talk about one more piece. I hear this all the time. This is used by apologists for cooking, or perhaps by people that simply aren't willing to give up cooked food themselves. And so what do? Well, we don't like to be in conflict with ourselves. So, there are people out there, maybe you've heard some of these people, met some of them, who will still tell you that there's no real evidence that smoking is bad for you. These are typically smokers, right? There's no evidence. Well, the evidence is really clear about that. But someone that wants to keep smoking might well prefer to tell themselves that the evidence doesn't exist, rather than admitting to themselves that they're actually killing themselves. So this is what we tend to do. Okay? The same thing. Forgot my example.
I heard the Japanese don't have so much cancer and they smoke like fish because they don't eat a lot of fat.
Fish don't smoke that much. I don't know anything about Japanese cancer rates and smoking. I can't respond to that. Where the hell was I going? Yeah, go ahead.
How about, like, for example, the tomatoes? They say
that's where I was going. Thank you.
When you cook them, you get.
That's where I was going. I got it. Right. Thank you. Right. So exactly where I was starting to go. So people that want to believe cooking is beneficial for you, one of the evidences they use for that is they'll point to tomatoes. And tomatoes is one of the few things that people point to. But lycopene is a naturally occurring chemical in tomatoes. It's good for you. And when you cook tomatoes, more lycopene is available to the body. And so people say, therefore, you should cook the tomato. And this idea stems from a cultural belief that we share in our culture. And that belief is that if something is good for us, more of it must be better. But that's not true. How much lycopene should you be getting from your food? Maybe no more than is available to you in its natural state. I mean, at the same time you're releasing more lycopene, you're destroying all the vitamin C of the tomato. Every single bit of it. and many other things too. So this justification for cooking that we get more of some nutrients, who cares? We don't need more nutrients. What we need is to not make the body more toxic and make the nutrients that are coming in as efficiently assimilated by the body as possible. And we want to keep the food in its natural balance. We're not going to improve on nature. Right? We're not going to improve on nature. So we can't take a perfect food like a tomato and make it better by cooking it. That's ridiculous. But there are many people out there who believe that we should be getting as much as we possibly can of whatever's good for us. Just remember, every single time anything goes in here, the body has to work. Okay, the body has to work to process anything we put in the mouth. So taking in much more of something isn't an advantage to us unless it's something we actually need. In the same way, I told you yesterday, no, don't drink more water to detoxify more quickly. Why not? It doesn't help. I mean, you need to drink what you need to drink, but if you take in any more than that, it's not helping you. You're not going to wash the toxins out of your body with water. They're bound up in your tissue. The additional water only helps until you get to the point that your body has what it needs. If it has less than it needs, taking in more makes sense. If it can't process things efficiently because there isn't enough water in the system to move things, then taking in more helps. But once you get to the point where it's able to efficiently do what it needs to do, taking in more in no way helps at all. It just creates an additional burden. Your kidneys have to work to process that water out of your system. And when you add the water to your system, you are diluting your electrolytes. So taking in more than you need is not useful in any way. And that's true whether it's water, that's true whether it's protein, it's true whether it's lycopene. All we need is what nature has given us. And if someone's not getting enough lycopene from eating raw tomatoes, there's a good chance they need to cleanse and heal the body, not cook the tomatoes. Okay? Any questions about this guideline? To be food for a species, a substance must provide its nutrients in a way that they're readily available when the food is eaten in its natural raw state.
Just questions about potato. I heard when you bake it, it turns almost like fruit sugar, like so it's better than, I mean, I know you're not supposed to eat it, but like the best way to eat it would be baking because of the turning into fruit sugar.
Okay, so the question was, okay, if you couldn't hear, was she's heard that baking a potato makes it better food, a healthier food, because the starch is converted to sugar. All starch is converted to sugar by cooking. So cooked starches, I mean, a raw starch tastes bad, tastes starchy. When you cook it, it gets sweeter. Okay? Does that mean we should be eating it? Absolutely not. It's not healthier. What happens is we actually create all kinds of problems. The caramelization of those sugars, they clump together, they become useless and toxic to the body. Again, we destroy much of the nutrient content. You know, the bottom line is that, like every other species on the planet, our natural diet is available to us in nature. It doesn't need to be cooked, doesn't need to be blended, doesn't need to be juiced, doesn't need to be processed in any way. It's not that you can't do those things. Obviously, everyone's free to do whatever they choose to. But you want to be clear. Now, again, don't pretend that something's true that's not true. What's true is that we have a natural diet like every other species. And it includes things that we can consume in their natural state. If who would want to eat a raw potato? No thanks. Yuck. The fact that it tastes bad to us in its natural state might be a clue. Not food for our bodies. Okay? If you have to cook it to make it food, it's not food for us. Okay, is that clear? Anybody else? Any other questions? If not, we're going to move on to our last guideline, okay? And I've alluded to this guideline a little bit before, but I want to take you on a little journey to help you see this one. And what I want you to do, the first thing you need to do, you know how you watch a movie, you all see The Matrix? You know, when you watch The Matrix, to enjoy the movie, you have to suspend disbelief, right? Otherwise you'd be going, that's stupid. You can't dodge bullets like that. Right? The movie wouldn't be much fun if you were constantly doing that. So we suspend disbelief. We willingly suspend our disbelief. In a similar way, have you noticed that when you go to a family function, it's always your 300-pound aunt that says, well, that's not healthy. You can't get enough protein to eat in that way. And you're looking at her going, what could you possibly know about healthy? Right? My point, everyone's an expert on nutrition. Everyone in the world knows everything about, have you noticed that? Everyone knows everything. Well, and you know, it's understandable why they think they do, because they can't turn on a TV or open a magazine without reading or hearing about it. It's covered all the time. But there's a huge diversity of opinions, and most of the people expressing their opinions don't look very healthy to me, which tells me that maybe what they're saying doesn't actually work. Okay? But the first step is, I want you to pretend you know nothing about nutrition. That may be hard to do, because you guys, too, came in here thinking you knew everything you needed to know, most of you. All right? I want you to take all of that and put it aside. I want you to imagine, this is going to be a stretch. I want you to imagine that you're in the tropics and haven't eaten for a while. It's not hard to imagine? Not for you guys, because you're in the tropics and haven't eaten for a while, 2.5 weeks. But imagine that, let's say you twisted your ankle, nothing serious, but it was swollen and very painful, and so you've been lying on the ground resting. Because you're in touch with your natural instinct, you know, oh, body needs to heal, better if I don't eat. In fact, what happens when we get sick, usually, we lose our appetite, right? So maybe you're feeling fine, but you've got this swollen, twisted ankle. You've been resting on the ground comfortably for several days, and now it feels better, and you're ready to eat. You're feeling hungry. And so you get up in search of food, and you're walking through the jungle looking for food, and you come to a clearing. And on the other side of the clearing, you see a tree. And maybe you've never seen it before, okay? But it's 15 or 20 feet tall, and it's covered with orange globes about the size of a baseball. Okay, maybe you've never seen an orange tree before. You don't have to know what it is. Does the sight of those ripe oranges, does that appeal to you? It's attractive, isn't it? I mean, human beings paint pictures of fruit, right? How many people paint pictures of steak and potatoes? You know, it's like, it's fruit. It's beautiful. It appeals to us. Like no one paints pictures of breakfast cereal and toast, and it's like it's not really all that attractive, right? But fruit's attractive to us. Now, how many of you have smelled citrus blossoms? Pretty amazing, aren't they? I remember visiting a friend in Fort Lauderdale. I just saw him on my last trip to Miami. I stopped by and saw this old buddy of mine I grew up with, who lives in Fort Lauderdale. And the last time I'd seen him was 10 years earlier at his house, when he just moved into this house. And we stepped out onto his back deck. It was night, it was dark, but I was hit with this wave of perfume. I was like, what is that amazing smell? He said, my grapefruit trees are in blossom. And citrus trees are in blossom and fruit at the same time. Right? The blossoms become the fruit, but it doesn't all happen at once. So you've got fruit and you've got blossoms. In fact, I went home that night with 2 big grocery bags full of grapefruits, because he and his wife didn't eat grapefruit. He was like, take all you want. I was like, I will. I was actually doing an event not far from there. I was in town for about 5 days, and I lived on grapefruits for a couple days, because they were amazing, fresh off the tree, grapefruits. But the point is, we're not just attracted by the appearance of the oranges, we're attracted by the scent as well, right? The fruit and the blossoms, like, we find this tree and we think, I want that. Whatever that tree, I want what that tree has to offer me. Even if you've never seen it before, something is instinctively telling you, go there. And so you see this tree, and on your now better ankle, you're now running across this clearing, full speed, because you're hungry. But by the time you get a quarter of the way across the clearing or so, you notice that to the right of the tree, of this first one, there's another tree. And this one, it's actually not a tree, but it looks a bit like a tree. It's a tall, skinny thing, and it's got these long green leaves, kind of rough on the edges. And from the very center of the plant comes a stalk that comes up and comes back down, and it's completely loaded with yellow crescent-shaped things. Okay, now maybe you've never seen a banana before. Does the sight of the ripe banana appeal to anyone here? Absolutely, right? Does the smell of the banana appeal to you? Yeah, right? So now you slow down from a full run to a trot because you've got two things and you've got to decide. Do I go for the orange globes or do I go for the yellow crescents? Starting to sound like a Lucky Charms situation, right? So you're now trotting across this clearing at half speed, and now at the slower speed you notice that on the other side of the first tree there's another tree, and this is a much bigger tree. This is 50 feet tall. It's got an enormous canopy, and on the end of every branch there's an orange or red or yellow kidney-shaped thing. Anyone like mangoes? Yeah? So this tree is covered with mangoes, and maybe you've never seen a mango before, but does the appearance of the mango appeal to you? How about the scent of the mango? Big time, right? So you're now walking across the clearing going, do I go there? Do I go there? Do I go over there? And from this new anyone here like nuts? It's okay. You can admit it. Yeah? In this no nut environment, you can admit that. Okay. So we have some nut likers here. Let's say that we have, what do you like? Almonds? Macadamias? Pistachios, different. Legume.
Pecans.
Pecans? We're in the tropics. Let's make it a macadamia tree. I don't know if pecans are going to grow down here, but maybe. So you're walking across the clearing. You know, you're looking around now because you're not running, and you notice, oh look, there's a tree over there that's covered with these things. They look interesting. It's macadamia nuts. And now it's even harder. Like, do I go there? Do I go there? Do I go there? Do I go there? You're hungry, but where are you headed? How are you going to satisfy your hunger? So you're now crawling across the clearing trying to decide which of these four places to go to. And from your new perspective, on your hands and knees, you see something you hadn't even noticed before. You hadn't noticed it because it's not brightly colored like the fruits. It's not hanging off there on the other branches like the nuts. It doesn't have the perfume of all these fruits. And it's actually the same color as the grass you've been walking across. And from your new perspective, you're not sure, but you think, and you ready for this? Hold on. You think you've found some wild broccoli. This is exciting, wild broccoli. You don't look that excited. So, if you hadn't eaten for 3 days, and you've got wild broccoli in front of you, and mangoes, oranges, bananas, and macadamias, are you stopping for the broccoli, or are you going for the other things?
I wouldn't eat the broccoli.
Wouldn't eat the broccoli. Would anyone eat the broccoli? Raw broccoli is really delicious, isn't it? Yeah. Yuck! It's astringent. Astringency is that quality that kind of makes your mouth want to turn inside out. Apples are slightly astringent. Unripe persimmon. Anyone try to eat an unripe persimmon? Yuck! It's like, that's what broccoli does. A little bit. Not as much as persimmons. Most of us would have probably never eaten broccoli a second time if one of 3 conditions hadn't existed. A, your mother made you eat it. Okay? Happened to me. B, someone didn't convince you it was good for you. Or C, it wasn't covered in cheese sauce. Broccoli's not that interesting, so we have to do stuff to it. Cook it, coat it with something. Most of us, and it's hard to even know, are you eating it because you really like it, or are you eating it because you think you should eat it? It doesn't not appeal to most human beings, taste buds. not the way fruit does. Why is that? Why is that true? Well, what do we run on? What's the primary fuel our body's operating on?
Sugar.
Sugar. Where do we get sugar? From broccoli or from mangoes? There's just a tiny bit more sugar in mangoes, bananas, oranges than there is in broccoli. Okay? Now, how many of you would have gone for the macadamias? Who would have made that their first stop? No one. Good choice. You ever try to get into a raw macadamia in the shell? They're hard as rocks. Okay? By the time you opened one macadamia nut and had one little tiny kernel, I've eaten 3 whole mangoes. I'm laying on the grass, it looks like some sort of a crime scene. I've got mango juice all over my body. And I'm completely satiated, and you're still trying to get into a single macadamia. It's, as I said to you the other day, chances are good that nuts could have played an important role for us when no other food was present. But who's going to take the time to open that little tiny thing when you've got this abundance of readily available sugar to you, which is what your body is looking for, glucose. Okay? Now, anyone who finds the broccoli more attractive probably needs a lot of minerals, probably has some significant imbalances. Other bodies are not going to find, human bodies are not going to be attracted to the raw broccoli like that. Okay? So, this last guideline is real simple. To be food for a species, a substance must appeal to that species' senses. Okay? Now, as I pointed out, you walk through a field of grass, of grains, for instance. Do you start salivating? No. We can't digest raw grains very well. Birds can. They're gramnivores. We're not. Okay? You're walking down the beach. You see the pile of seaweed washed up on the sand. Do you start salivating? Not likely. It's kind of gross and slimy. Okay? We don't get excited. You see the bunny rabbit hop across your path. Do you pounce on it like the Diablo does? Or would like to if he could? The cat? Of course not. We don't have a natural instinct to kill other species. Okay, we see a little animal, we think, oh, how cute. Okay, we don't want to eat them. We want to pet them. What are we most attracted to, most of us, naturally? Things that taste sweet. That's because we run on sugar. Here in the tropics, where we come from, most mammals, more than 70%, eat primarily fruit. As do reptiles, as do lots of species. Birds, most birds. Have you seen a toucan yet? Anyone seen any toucan family member here? Before you guys got here, we had one in one of the trees right back there. And I would have first thought, well, that giant beak is probably to open nuts and so forth. It must be really strong, right? It's all for show. The big beaks are essentially to get laid. That's what they're for. They're just show. What do toucans eat? Fruits. No nuts, no seeds, just fruit. Parrots, lots of fruit.